What's going on, Instagramly and friends? It's your boy Kai Speaks, and thank you for tuning in to Talented Tuesdays, airing every Tuesday on your Instagram live station. Like I said, my name is Kai Speaks. This is brought to you by the GoldenKey Foundation. I got my man Herson Sanchez back on the show. If you don't know, or if you do remember, Herson was on the show the first episode that we aired January 23rd, and he's back again to share us a different different style of talent that he's going to share with us. But anyway, Herson, you can introduce yourself real quick. Tell us a little bit more about where you're from, how you got here, for people who don't know who you are.
Yeah, well, as Q said, I'm extremely talented. I'm multi-talented. I'm the inspiration for this show, basically.
Pretty much. Like,
no, I'm kidding. I'm so kidding. That's so arrogant. Thank you to everyone that's tuning in. My name is Herson Sanchez. I am a second-year doctoral student at Florida International University. My research stems around race, power, and education. Very happy to be here tonight. Looking forward to just kind of hanging out, talking, chatting with you, and let's kind of see where the conversation takes us.
For those who don't understand the insider, Herson just mentioned about him kind of being the inspiration of this.
I was so kidding.
He was kidding, but it's somewhat true, because we're going to be talking about Herson's show that he started called Woke Wednesdays. Follow him at Woke Wednesdays on IG. And as you see, the names kind of flow similar to Talented Tuesdays. So, you know, when I met Herson, I seen what he had going on with Woke Wednesdays. It really inspired me to kind of use the platform that I was building up and kind of make something of it as well. And that's where Talented Tuesdays came from, and using that platform to get creatives together, young and upcoming artists, to give them a platform to share their stories, to share their journeys, to share what they do, and also to help the youth see that there are different types of talents out here. And you don't always have to be a ball player. You don't always have to rap, dance. And I want you to see that there's a talent in literally everything that we do. I had some doctors on here, to spoken word artists, to people, to dance instructors, like all these things are actresses, exactly. Yeah. So all these things tie into Talented Tuesdays. So I'm glad Herson is on here again. So a little bit, Herson, just tell us a little bit about what Woke Wednesdays is and the purpose of you starting it.
Yeah, so Woke Wednesdays is an Instagram page. Feel free to follow at Woke Wednesdays, where I address different issues pertaining to social consciousness, social justice. Every single day I post multiple posts, just like I said, regarding social justice. Anywhere from race, gender, class, immigration, LGBTQIA+, identities, you name it. And in addition to the posts, I also host a live show similar to this every single Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And similar to the post, all the shows are regarding social justice. I've been doing it for a year and 3 months. I haven't missed a Wednesday yet. Every single Wednesday for the past year and 3 months, I've done an episode. So last week was the history of salsa music and the ties it has to colonization, race, and patriarchy, and how we can use salsa as a way to also combat homophobia. So that was a very awesome episode. We had 2 professional dancers on the show and a professional drum player, and I also played piano for the episode. So it was a great episode, and every episode is somewhat like that. So that's a little bit about what Woke Wednesdays is.
Cool. I hope you guys can tune in someday for Woke Wednesdays as well. I see some comments already. Hey fam, coordinated outfits. I guess we kind of coordinated outfits, I guess.
Black and gold seems to be a good color for us.
It's a good color. Also, for those who are just tuning in, make sure that you leave those comments. You can drop some questions as well. As I go on with the show, I'll be asking Herson a lot of questions. But if you think I missed something, or if you just have something that pops in your mind, feel free to comment. But I will do the housekeeping that I almost forgot to do in the beginning of the show. Make sure you keep those comments positive. Let's keep the negativity out of there. So other than that, you've been having some pretty great success with Woke Wednesdays. I recently went with you to that panel discussion called Creative and Broke. Tell us a little bit about your experience of being on that panel. At first you were talking about your talents with guitar and piano. But tell us a little bit more about the side of Woke Wednesdays and why it was important for you to serve on that panel.
So recently, last week, there was a great panel hosted by In Good Company. If you have Instagram, it seems like you do, please feel free to follow them, In Good Company. young man and a young woman. They partnered up together to create this company. They're very talented, very honest, just good people. And they reached out to have a panel regarding being creative and broke, and also kind of being young, a young person. And initially, I didn't know why they reached out to me. I don't consider myself a creative person. I'm a musician, but that's just kind of something that I just do. I don't really think of myself as a creative person. So I got to the show, and I think once the show kind of started, I started thinking about Woke Wednesdays as something that I created. I don't think I created it. I think I just kind of it was a way to call out something that has been created. So systems of oppression. That was my way of calling that out and educating around that. So I talked about that, about what does it mean to have a platform that is completely free, that you don't have to pay for. I don't make money off this platform. And what does it mean to have a guest every single Wednesday, or multiple guests for every single show? And I just talked about that. I didn't really talk about how Woke Wednesdays started, but I did look at it from the perspective that this is something that I'm fully committed to, that as a young person, just trying to create something and just kind of keeping it alive, and just kind of the importance of that.
Now, I want to touch on what you mentioned a little bit earlier, as when at first you didn't see yourself as creative, until you saw, well, hey, Woke Wednesday is something that I created. Yeah. And that kind of reflects back to the purpose of why we started Talented Tuesdays, was to help people see that. Because me personally, I literally believe that everyone possesses some type of creativity. Everybody is talented. We just have to point out what those things are, and we have to define how it is how it is creative, or how it makes you talented. Because we see one thing and we automatically assume these things are what makes us talented, when we don't. There's a whole nother spectrum of things that make us creative and things that make us talented as well.
The interesting thing about talent is that talent is an adjective. It describes a noun, right? It is a label. And like oftentimes labels do, they come into play because we have to give something a name. And when it comes to myself and thinking of myself as a creative person or a talented person, I tend to shy away from the word talent. I think we've had this conversation. And creative, I just didn't think of myself as such until the label was kind of bestowed upon me. And then I was like, oh, okay. And once I kind of took on that category, then I started to think of myself as such. So then I could talk a little bit more about the creative aspects of Woke Wednesdays, or about being a musician, or whatever we're talking about.
Yeah. So on that panel, it was a great discussion. All the people on that panel were pretty informed of what they were talking about. Yeah. Had different experiences.
Absolutely.
But what I thought was funny, and we talked about this after the panel, when you were called on your use of the word expert. Yeah, so like you said, and that was your first time being called on something. Did it make you feel a certain way at the moment, and you didn't really think about it until after you kind of reflected on it? Like, how did that make you feel with that being?
To give them some context, I was talking about the responsibility of the educator, specifically those who have a PhD. I think I said that 5% of Americans have a PhD. 1.86 of that 5% identify as Black or Latino. So there's a very small amount of people who identify as Black and Latino in the United States who hold a PhD. As such, a PhD is usually I didn't say usually. I said a PhD makes someone an expert in a field, in a particular area of study. And so I use the word expert. Expert is a word that I usually kind of repudiate. I tend not to like that word because I think it's dismissive. I think it creates hierarchies. But I used it in the moment, which I didn't like. And as soon as I said it, I was like, man, I can't believe I said that. And sure enough, I got called out by a brilliant young woman who was on the panel as well. And her point was that she kind of eschews this term of expert, because to her, the poor person whose neighborhood is being gentrified is an expert in gentrification. And so she called me out on my use of the term expert. And as soon as she called me out on it, I'm not used to being called out by a lot of people, because usually when I speak about something, I try to speak about something that I'm very well informed on. And if I'm not well informed, I try not to speak on it. I try to read up on it and become knowledgeable. But she called me out. It was a great call out. I respected the call out. I think it was well deserved. And as soon as she said that, it immediately kind of convicted me. I started thinking about it. And about how I'm oftentimes the very person that I critique. So by me critiquing someone who uses the term expert, like, it's kind of hypocritical of me when I myself am using this terminology. And after the show, I went up to her and I was like, thank you so much for calling me out. That was a great call out. I really appreciated it. Your point was excellent. And one thing that I really appreciated about her, that it was done out of love. I think that whole kind of panel was just, the atmosphere was just so embracing and so loving, and we were all there for similar purposes. We take different approaches, dramatically different approaches, but we all kind of have, I think, ultimately similar goals. So this kind of, and I think that's part of being an educator and part of being a student, being able to also be held accountable. And we grow from that, and now we're here. Right?
And speaking of approaches, I think one approach that you mentioned that is very important is, if you speak on things that you're well informed of, and if you don't feel that you're well informed, you try not to speak on it and you read up on it. And I feel as though nowadays that is very important, because either not a lot of us are reading to obtain knowledge, but when we're arguing and debating certain things, we use a lot of "I feel like" arguments, and those tend to not go anywhere at all. So that was just something that I wanted to point out, and hopefully whoever watches this sees that point as well and begins to read a little bit more to obtain more knowledge.
And the I feel likes also, like, they can serve a purpose. They can, sometimes the I feel likes can be the most powerful knowledge, right? Like, if someone tells you about her being a single mother and giving birth, her I feel like is extremely powerful. No book that you read as a man, no book that I ever read I can never understand that experience. But when it comes to other issues where you really need some intricate and nuanced knowledge about, if we're talking about like the actual structure of oppression, I think it's extremely important, especially when we talk about race now with Starbucks, and I mean, there's always a different race issue going on, right? I think it's extremely important to have, to be well versed and be knowledgeable about this. And if you're not there, then definitely look for someone who might be a little bit more there, and talk with them, read with them, ask them for literature. I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, having conversations like these are key.
We talk all the time about this stuff, like every single day. Yeah,
and that's what gets the ideas flowing. And matter of fact, what are some of your thoughts? Like, what are your thoughts when you go into starting new topics for Woke Wednesdays? Like, how did these topics for Woke Wednesdays come into play and actually become a reality?
Well, I think I think it all kind of stems with how I started the first episode. The first episode. So I began my working on my doctorate in 2016, and I was during my master's, I had been doing a lot of just kind of reading and reflecting and just kind of work around race. And I'd always been interested in it, but I just never had like the book knowledge. I had like racial experiences, but I never had like the book knowledge. So I started doing all that. So when I started my doctorate, I really wanted to get really into like the nuances of race and racism and these structures. So I had been reading so much about it that I wanted to share what I had been just kind of learning, because I kept on seeing that people were having a lot of conversations and arguments around this, but from a very misinformed and uninformed perspective. So I thought that I could maybe shed some light on some of these issues, and maybe just kind of provide a different way of thinking about this. So that was one of the biggest just catalysts to starting Woke Wednesdays. So that first episode of Woke Wednesdays, I just talked about race. I talked about racism. And I had a lot of challenging questions, things I just did not know the answer to, which made me go back and read some more and talk to more people. And so that's kind of how I do every show now. Things that I've been reading about, things that bother me, things that just kind of get on my nerves, things that are popular right now, because ultimately we live in this capitalistic world where people just want to be fed what's new, what's popping, like every single moment of the day. But that's usually how I come up with an episode. I talk to someone, and if something's bothering me, something's bothering them, usually when I have a guest on the show, I might ask them. Sometimes I have a guest on the show where I just think they're just very bright, they're very smart, very well informed. And I'll ask them, like, what bothers you? Like, what bothers you? And then they come up with something awesome that bothers, not awesome, but something that's really interesting that bothers them. And it's like, all right, cool, let's talk about that. And that's kind of what leads to an episode. So just kind of knowing yourself, just kind of paying attention to the news. Then yeah, like let's talk about it. Kind of like, I love what you're doing, especially with your you have a multifaceted approach to talent. You said earlier that anything can be a talent. Well, I think when it comes to wokeness, which I actually hate that term, when it comes to just social consciousness and issues of oppression, we can look at this in so many ways. We can take your couch, for example, and how it's manufactured in a country where children are working on it. All right, cool. Let's talk about sweatshops. Right. Cool. So there's so many approaches when it comes to addressing these issues.
Hey, shout out to the people who just tuned in. I see Derek Parker, my boy just tuned in. Dr. TJ3 just tuned in. Shout out to you guys. If this is your first time, feel free to ask some questions. My man Hurston Sanchez is on here talking about Woke Wednesdays and what he does. But back to when you create these topics for Woke Wednesdays, do you see in the near future, you were talking about things that are popular right now. Do you see you having an episode about what's going on with Starbucks and the two gentlemen that were arrested?
So the tough thing about, and as someone who hosts a show, the tough thing about that is that you try to book people in advance to do shows. All right. I remember I talked to you one time where it was like, man, for the past 5 weeks, I had every show booked. So that final week was coming. I was like, man, I gotta think about booking another, couple weeks. And you can't book too in advance because then people could flake out. But you have to have this balance. So right now I'm 2 weeks. I'm already booked for 2 weeks. I already talked to someone about booking that third week. So by the time I get to Starbucks, right, it won't be for like another 4 weeks. However, this has challenged me to think of how I do the show. So it is called Woke Wednesday. So that means the episode is every single Wednesday. I have done times where I just kind of talk about myself on a Sunday or like a Thursday. I just talk about myself about something that's really been bothering me. So if the Starbucks thing was really bothering me, kind of just setting heavy on me, I would just kind of
get on live or just a random day and just
because ultimately, like your show, it's recorded on Instagram. You can share it on the Instagram story, and then we upload it to YouTube. Right. So just like your show, so people can always catch it later. Yeah.
So with a show like this, because you just said a whole lot that leads up to my next question. And that's what kind of sacrifices go into being so committed to having a show weekly, booking people, to just all the things that come into play. What are some of the biggest sacrifices that you had to make for Woke Wednesdays?
Man, I think prior to Woke Wednesdays, I wasn't a person that was on my phone all the time. Now I catch myself being on my phone all. Can I cuss? No.
Sometimes I curse.
Okay.
Just last week I cursed.
Oh yeah. So I'm on the show all the time now, or on the page all the time now. Something that I really dislike about myself is that I've become this kind of I don't know if obsessed is the good word, but I've become very particular. Just kind of I'm always looking at the page to see if it's growing, as if numbers
really matter.
Defines success, right? We live in a world where oftentimes the numbers, the more of this you have, that defines success. And I always told myself that I wish Woke Wednesdays didn't have to exist, but unfortunately it does. And I remember we were talking about it, and I was like, man, I haven't had new followers in like a week. And I was so upset with myself after I said that, and I started thinking about it. And I definitely kind of self-checked myself, and I'm like, why do numbers define success, and and also I thought of myself like, am I a masochist? Like, am I looking for people to be in pain so I can share posts about them and gain new followers? So that was just kind of, when we talk about sacrifices, I think self-examination is extremely important, because part of that sacrifice, I think in that moment, I think it was subconscious, that I was just kind of going into a realm that I did not want to be in, which is thinking of numbers as success and trying to just up my page, the popularity of it. So that's one, I think, sacrifice. Other sacrifices are monetary, right? Buying the cameras and the tripods and the chairs. That's money that as a college student, I just don't have a lot of. Being available every single Wednesday. I've done shows from Texas, Ohio, North Carolina, I think Georgia, because I've been traveling. So luckily, I've always found someone who lives there that I know who would be down to do an episode. So that's a sacrifice too. So a lot of just in time, of course. But just like there are sacrifices, there are also really great things that come out of doing a page like Woke Wednesdays as well. So I don't want to.
So, shout out to the new viewer that we have, Flourish. Welcome to Talented Tuesdays. Also, we got a comment from Miss AKA85. Well, if it helps to know, Starbucks is closing all stores on May 29th for bias training, racial bias training to be specific.
Yeah.
Just an FYI, which we were just talking about that, talking about how, you know, it's a step up. It's in the right direction.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts that you had on that training that they're implementing?
Well, what we usually see when it comes to trainings regarding diversity, especially in corporate America or in higher education, which is the field that I'm in, usually these type of trainings address attitudes. So I actually have a document that was produced by a company that is specifically geared to address issues of diversity in the workplace. And what this document focused on was the attitudes. So have you ever felt that you hate someone because they're gay? Yes, right? And then we address that attitude. What can you do to not hate gay people? Right? Have you ever been scared when you saw a black man? Yes. Okay, so what can you do to not be scared of black men? So the focus of these trainings becomes the attitude of a person. So my attitude towards this person, so it's also individualistic, right? So it's my attitude towards a person. And that's what the training is made to do. However, part of the way oppression works and the conversations around race and gender and class is that they become more visible. So as opposed to me saying, I don't like this person because they're Hispanic, I will say, hey, I'd rather have people here who speak English, right? I'll use like this coded terminology. Right. And these trainings are not geared to address that. And the second part of the trainings that I find just stupid, for lack of a better word, is that ultimately, since they focus so much on the attitude, they don't focus on the system or the structure of oppression that creates that attitude in the first place. Right? So no one is born a racist, a classist, a sexist. It is the system that you grow up in that makes you into this person.
These things are learned. Me and TJ was just talking about that, the coded languages that...
Oh yeah, and that really became popular in the 70s with the Moynihan Report. Y'all should please look it up.
What is it again?
The Moynihan Report, Moynihan, where it was this person who was a president's aide. He was I think that's how you spell it, Moynihan Report. It was an aide to a president. I forgot which president it was. Was it Johnson or Nixon? I forgot which one it was. They told them that, hey, we can't be talking about the blacks, about the Mexicans, which really means Hispanic people. We can't be talking about them with such crude language, with such crass language. So you can't drop the N-word anymore. You have to change your terminology to like the urban population, right? Urban encompasses poor black and Latino. And you didn't really see this until about the 70s, post-civil rights era. And now we see it, which is part of one of our biggest contentions with Donald Trump, is that he's so explicit with his language. But presidents were talking just like this 40, 50 years ago. However, people were used to it. Right? But then racism is a very intelligent, diabolical concept. They changed their language to continue racism through different ways.
Just like we have to code switch.
Absolutely. So we had to code switch because of their code switch. So, yeah.
So, all right, now, we last touched on the sacrifices. Now we want to get on the lighter side of it. And could you share with one of your best experiences with Woke Wednesday?
Oh, man, there's been so many. So many. I guess the most recent one, 2 weeks ago, I was asked to go speak to, I had a teacher on the show. We had an episode regarding guns in schools. And one of the teachers had all her 8th grade students tune into the show. There's like 40 kids on the show. It was awesome. And they all followed the page now. And she was saying, hey, this school is predominantly poor Hispanic kids. So she was telling me, hey, we would love you to just come by and just talk to the students. They've never seen a Latino man that talks about this type of stuff. And she said the word like, they've never seen someone who looks like you in the position that you are in, I guess, working towards a PhD. And so this would be very impactful to the children. So I'm like, of course. So I went out there, and I went out with a tank top and a fitted
tank top, bros,
and some J's. Tattoos were all out. And these kids could not imagine that someone who had tattoos and a fitted and just some J's J's means Jordans. Could also be smart, right? We have defined from a societal perspective what smart looks like, what smart sounds like. And I hung out with them, and at the end of it, this little girl came up to me. She was a 6th grader, and she was like, "Hey, what do you think about issues regarding the LGBTQIA plus community?" And we talked. She was like, "Because I'm part of that community." This little girl, like she's probably 11. So we talked, we hung out, and then by the end of it, she was like, "Can I have a hug?" And man, I about broke down because it was so authentic. Thai beats.